Back in 1984, James Cameron changed the world with the iconic classic The Terminator.
Come with me if you want to live.
Let's take a look back at why this sci-fi horror masterpiece has never been forgotten, and why it's still so relevant to this day. In the run-up to the release of his film Piranha 2, director James Cameron came down ill whilst in Rome, and ended up experiencing a vivid fever dream that would change his life and the movie business forever. Cameron dreamt of a metallic torso holding kitchen knives, dragging itself away from an explosion. When he awoke, Cameron realised he had just dreamt up the basis for the terrifying villain of the Terminator. He decided he had to write a script around the idea, despite not being a big director or having a decent budget behind him. However, he was inspired by John Carpenter's 1978 low-budget horror Halloween and decided to push forward with the premise despite the lack of funds. While sleeping on the couch of his friend, science fiction writer Randall Frakes, Cameron wrote the first draft for The Terminator. When developing the script, Cameron enlisted the help of his screenwriter friend, William Wisher, who actually went on to have a tiny role in the movie as the police officer who confronts Carl Reese when he first arrives in 1984. Originally, the Terminator script consisted of two Terminators being sent to the past, one being the Terminator who is actually in the film, and another made of liquid metal, but Cameron felt the technology of the time was not sufficient to create the visuals needed. Of course, the liquid metal Terminator did eventually show up in the iconic sequel, Terminator 2 Judgment Day, released in 1991. Gale and Hurd, who had previously worked at New World Pictures, showed some interest in the project, and Cameron sold the rights to her for the ridiculous amount of $1, which he said he ultimately regretted. What were you thinking, James? Hurd managed to get Orion Pictures interested, but they stipulated they would only distribute the movie if Cameron could find financial backing elsewhere. Chairman and President of Hemdale Film Corporation John Daly expressed interest, and agreed to finalise the deal when Cameron went all out at the pitch meeting. The director convinced his friend, actor Lance Henriksen, to show up at the meeting acting like the Terminator. Henriksen wore a leather jacket, had fake cuts on his face and gold foil on his teeth. Daly was blown away by Cameron's commitment and creativity, and agreed to back the film with help from Orion, with the original budget sitting at $4 million, but being eventually raised to $6.5 million. Of course, it has been said for years that Henriksen was the original choice for the Terminator. However, this is in fact not true, and the rumour started due to this event when Henriksen helped Cameron out, but he was never going to be the Terminator. Arnold Schwarzenegger was suggested by Orion to play Carl Reese, Sarah Connor's soldier protector. Cameron was cautious, however, as Schwarzenegger's star was majorly on the rise, and he felt he would need someone even more known to play the Terminator, with names such as Sylvester Stallone and Mel Gibson in the mix, both of which turned down the role.
No, it isn't possible.
What's not possible? He's fantastic. This is his best performance ever.
Other names were considered, one of them being O.J. Simpson, and the story is now iconic that Cameron did not feel Simpson would be believable as a killer. This of course turned out to be incredibly ironic considering the future events involving O.J. Simpson. Yeah, Cameron met Schwarzenegger and thus began a decades-long friendship, slowly coming round to the fact that Schwarzenegger should not play Carl Reese, but the Terminator, as he and Arnold were on the same page about how the character should be portrayed.
And the funny thing was, when I went to that lunch, I didn't see that as you know, in the back of my mind, I was thinking the Terminator, you were thinking the Terminator, but we sit and we have this polite lunch because we've never met each other, and neither one of us mentions it, right? And then we both go back to our guys and say, Terminator!
Schwarzenegger, while confident he could play the Terminator, was not as passionate as Cameron about the project, at one point calling the Terminator some shit movie I'm doing for a few weeks. He has gone on to say he regrets not being as excited as Cameron was, and if he had known it would go on to be his most famous role, he would have of course looked at it more favourably. In Schwarzenegger's defence, Cameron was not a big director at the time, and of course initially the Terminator does indeed just sound like a low budget B picture, not something that would go on to change movies forever. The role of Carl Reese was vacant again, and James Cameron considered rock musician Sting, who had appeared in a few gritty films by then, including Dune and Quadrophenia. However, Sting turned down the role due to Cameron's unknown status. Other names in the mix for Reese included Superman himself, Christopher Reeve, Kurt Russell, Tommy Lee Jones, Matt Dillon, and even, believe it or not, Bruce Springsteen. Mental. Cameron eventually settled on Michael Biehn, an actor he would go on to work with again in Aliens and the Abyss. Bean said he, like Arnold, early on saw the film as a B picture, but as he got to know Cameron, he knew it was a lot bigger than that. Canadian actress Lisa Langlois was offered the role of Sarah Connor but turned it down as she was filming romantic comedy The Slugger's Wife. Melissa Sue Addison and Jessica Harper's names floated around, and Leah Thompson and Rosanna Arquette actually auditioned for the role. In the end, James Cameron settled on Linda Hamilton, who was fresh off shooting Children of the Corn. Because of his gratitude for Henriksen securing financing with his Terminator cosplay, Cameron also found a role for him, casting him as a police officer named Vukovich. Early on, Orion Pictures put forward two suggestions. One Cameron accepted, one he did not. He was happy to honour their wishes to emphasise the romance between Kyle Reese and Sarah Connor, but was not keen on including a robot pet android for Reese. Yeah, that definitely wouldn't have worked in this sort of film. Filming for the Terminator was delayed in early 1983 because Schwarzenegger was unavailable, filming Conan the Destroyer at the time. Cameron filled the time well, writing the script for Rambo First Blood Part 2, meeting the producers to discuss making Aliens, and finally, refining the Terminator script. Fair play, James, fair play. Filming began in March 1984 in Los Angeles. Cameron said as soon as Schwarzenegger arrived on the set, things became larger than life and he could visualise the project being a success. Sadly, Linda Hamilton sprained her ankle early on in filming, and of course pretty much all of Sarah Connor's scenes involve her having to run. Hamilton's ankle was taped up every day, and she spent most of the film in great pain. Hats off to Linda Hamilton, she's a badass, but also I must say hearing that kind of adds to the convincing performance because as she was in constant pain, the desperation is written all over her face, so the character's struggle feels even more authentic. Famous special effects legend Stan Winston was hired to create the visual effects in the movie, but actually ended up not straying too far from Cameron's original design for the character. The stop motion sequences were developed by a company called Fantasy 2, who intended to make the skeletal frame of the Terminator have as similar as possible movements to what we see Arnold Schwarzenegger doing on screen. The iconic scene where the Terminator fixes his injuries was done with a puppet that took 6 months to create. What they achieved with this model was incredible. I really appreciate the time they took. There's haunting strangeness to this scene, and while it doesn't look flawless these days, the decisions Cameron makes in this scene work to elevate the effects, but more on that later. The Terminator had several deleted scenes. 2 of these gave the idea of Skynet and the future war some more background. The first scene shows Sarah locating Cyberdyne as she went on to do in Terminator 2. She tries to convince Carl that they should destroy the building in order to prevent the future war, but Reese makes it clear his mission is to conserve the future and not change it. The second deleted scene reveals that the owner of Cyberdyne finds the Terminator's microchip after Sarah has crushed the machine in the film's culmination. The scenes were part of a subplot in which Sarah and Carl do eventually agree to blow up Cyberdyne, and this was actually the reason they were shown making bombs in the film. It was originally to dispose of Cyberdyne. When the characters end up outside Cyberdyne while on the run from the Terminator, it wasn't a coincidence. This subplot actually ended up in the film's novelisation, and of course went on to be the major plot point in Terminator 2. Cameron ended up cutting the scenes, so if you got the chance to make a sequel, which he of course did, he had an entire plot thread to open up the world of the Terminator. The Terminator was released on October 26, 1984 in the United States, playing at 1,005 theatres and shooting to the top of the box office, and ultimately achieving an incredible 78 million worldwide from its 6 million budget. Not bad at all. In the run-up to the film's release, Orion Pictures did not have much confidence in the Terminator, and were also dreading a negative critical reception. While the movie was indeed a huge success, Orion were maybe half right, as the critical response at the time was mixed. Janet Maslin of the New York Times criticised the brutal nature of the film, and the Pittsburgh Press remarked that it was full of artsy ugliness. However, it did receive very good reviews from the Los Angeles Times, who called the Terminator a cracking thriller, and also the Milwaukee Journal deemed the film the most chilling science fiction thriller since Alien. Famous movie review team of Roger Ebert and Gene Siskel had a surprising reaction to the film, with Ebert liking it more than Siskel, and Siskel's criticism being a bit bizarre, to be honest.
And it takes the whole idea of time travel and makes it into kind of a bittersweet sort of thing.
Yeah.
Plus, non-stop action, which is probably why the movie is #1 at the box office. So, as an action picture, I thought it was pretty well made.
As an action picture, I thought it was not particularly well made, but the love story, you're right, is kind of nice.
The action was routine in the Terminator? What were you on, Gene, considering every filmmaker on Earth would be imitating this action for the next decade, including Cameron himself? I don't know what film you were watching, brother.
Are you okay?
Better than you were the day that you liked Starship Troopers.
Okay. Oh, no.
The Terminator was such a brave and ambitious piece of work, and James Cameron was lucky it was the 80s, because that's probably one of the only times you could have such a dark and nihilistic film be such a game-changing smash hit. Led by an intense electronic score, frantic pace, and the constant feeling that you can't relax, the film is far from being just an 80s B-movie, which is perhaps what people were expecting. The Terminator contained elements of what we had seen before, but so much the film was original, and devastatingly so. The film was a shotgun blast through the genre, and through film in general. You could say it didn't require much acting for Schwarzenegger to pull off playing the Terminator, but I disagree. This was a new kind of performance. He was required to play a character who had no empathy, no emotion and no feeling, and Schwarzenegger carefully tapped into the little nuances and gestures that would make that work. His movements are precise and calculated. The way Arnold portrays the Terminator as laser focused on his mission and nothing else is one of the strongest elements of the performance. Nothing gets in his way of hunting for Sarah. The Terminator is just moving forward, deliberately and methodically, for the entire film. He doesn't stop to consider or think. Everything he does is either just getting another step closer to Sarah, or repairing himself so he can continue searching for Sarah. There is nothing for the Terminator to do or say other than his mission, and Arnold does incredibly well at conveying the tunnel vision, and he brings such an uncompromising killer instinct to the character. Like Carl Reese says, finding Sarah is all the Terminator exists to do.
That Terminator is out there. It can't be bargained with. It can't be reasoned with. It doesn't feel pity or remorse or fear, and it absolutely will not stop, ever, until you are dead.
Many have likened the first Terminator to a horror film more than a sci-fi action movie, and it's easy to see why. The Terminator is a terrifying villain, nearly indestructible, so he reminds us of the slasher antagonists of the past. There are also scenes where the Terminator stalks his prey, slowly and methodically, just as those killers did. And of course there are gruesome and violent killing scenes. The movie also has a strong final girl in Sarah Connor, who starts off meek and mild and ends up seasoned and strong because of her experience. And of course Sarah takes final girls to a whole new level, because she's not just a survivor, she's the mother of the future. She becomes someone we root for, not just because she makes it through, but because the very fate of humanity relies on her survival. So with all these common tropes, the Terminator is clearly a horror film too, but it took what we had seen in slashers in a completely new direction. We are dealing with a new kind of villain, not just a man or a monster, but technology itself turning on humanity in the most brutal and uncompromising way. That idea forces you to sit up and take notice, as now the threat is not just a killer targeting people, but an existential, all-encompassing boogeyman looming over the head of all of humanity. Linda Hamilton really is perfect as Sarah Connor. She's incredibly normal, kind and sweet. She's the last person you'd expect to be the mother of the saviour of the human race. And I love that all through the Terminator movies, it's never great, powerful people who are the heroes, because obviously Sarah and eventually John in T2, these are incredibly normal people, but they both just have very good hearts. And I really appreciate the idea that it's kind-hearted humans, who are the ones that ultimately see the world through to victory in the end, not the ones with the most money or power. In fact, in the Terminator movies, these people were almost always presented as the problem that got us into this point in the first place, where machines can take over. Michael Biehn is also fantastic as Carl Reese. Reese knows what the Terminator is capable of. He has seen the devastation with his own eyes. I've realised watching the film today that you can kind of liken Carl Reese to Dr. Loomis from Halloween. He's ranting and raving to everyone around him about the evil that's coming, but no one believes him, and this only makes him rant and rave even more. Bihn's performance is genuine, believable. You take one look at him and you believe he has seen a terrifying future. All he has ever known is the horrific scenes we are given flashbacks to, but he doesn't have time to dwell on it. His whole life is just survival.
We're survivors. Here. There. Nobody even knew who started it. It was the machine, Sarah.
Sarah Connor manages to break down the walls and gives Reese seemingly his first human relationship. It's a very emotional and charming moment in a very dark film. It means a lot to see her break through the barriers he has built up and meet the real person. Sarah teaches Reese how to feel again, and Reese teaches Sarah the importance of never giving up, to the point where by the end of the film Sarah is the one dragging the injured Reese along, refusing to let him give up. It's a heartwarming romance, to be honest, and you don't expect the Terminator to have a genuine love story underneath all the dark and dismal themes, but I think it deserves to be remembered for having that too.
I came across time for you, Sarah. I love you. I always have.
The film was incredibly ahead of its time and is so relevant now with our current anxiety about AI in the future. It's spooky how much this movie nails the worries that a lot of people have, and this was 1984. James Cameron really was a visionary with this script, and it's for that reason that the Terminator still resonates. The message is still haunting, the anxieties have become even more realised in our present day world, and will continue to grow, and because of this the Terminator is a piece of work that's becoming timeless, while a lot of other 80s properties are now quite dated.
Fuck you, asshole.
And while the effects specifically in the scene in which the Terminator takes his eye out and replaces it look somewhat less real today, you can't deny what was achieved back here, and Cameron makes sure it doesn't even matter, you're not even focused on whether it looks real or not. He makes so many genius decisions in that scene, such as when he cuts away to a shot of the water-filled basin with blood dripping into it, and dissolving into the progressively reddening liquid. He creates such a mood, slowly but surely, and you're just watching something so horrific that you've never seen before, and you're just staring at the screen in shock. With several loud squelching sounds, the eye finally emerges as a red glossed over mass that the machine lets fall into the basin, with a repulsive plopping sound. The audience is completely focused on the insane thing the character is doing, so that enhances the effects because Cameron doesn't give you a chance to judge them, or decide if they look real. The impact of the situation is much more important than whether the effects are perfect. I think it's easy to take the Terminator's action scenes for granted when of course the film's sequel is one of the greatest action movies ever made. I love the wonderful first car chase where in between swerving to escape the machine, Carl has explained to Sarah who he and the Terminator are. Cameron cuts between the cars so well, it's not so fast you can't breathe, but it's enough to build up this impending sense of doom and conveys the stress and tension of the situation. You're just thrust into this what the hell situation, you're thrilled by the action and chase, but your mind is working and you're getting more and more invested and wanting to know what's going on. Cameron is perfect at making action not throwaway, but a part of the story. Also love the chase scene in the tunnel where we see Arnold in his iconic Terminator gear for the first time, on a motorcycle chasing Carl and Sarah, who are desperately hurling pipe bombs at him. I love the vulnerability and desperation and scrappiness of the action scenes in this movie. By the second film the hero is still an underdog, but he can still fight the villain, whereas here Kyle has none of his weapons from the future, and Sarah isn't the Sarah of the future yet. Kyle has no chance whatsoever against the Terminator, so it's quite literally a soldier relying on his own resourcefulness and nothing else in the face of the most dangerous force on the planet. The stakes just feel incredibly high, and the action is so kinetic and full of frenzy, as every decision taken by Kyle is just using whatever is around him that can help him get a bit further ahead, even for just 30 seconds of the machine. The future scenes look truly nightmarish, and I can't imagine people watching this in the 80s, it must have blown their minds. It looks fantastic now, let alone then. And they've really missed the trick not making a Terminator movie actually set in this war. What was Terminator Salvation thinking? Have a Terminator movie in this war. Not in broad daylight, not in different looking landscapes. This war. Why not? Terminator Genesis sort of has it at the start of the movie. They sort of recreate this, and it's actually the best part of Terminator Genesis. And then they just don't have the bravery to go all the way with it. This is the way to go if you're ever going to do the Terminator again, but it has to be this nighttime, horrific situation where you can't imagine anyone surviving for one moment. Humans are living literally like cockroaches. And I love the dismal nature of the Terminator because the future could have been bad but still have some hope beneath the surface. But no, in the Terminator, when you see the future, there's nothing to believe in. In fact, one of the only pieces of hope Kyle Reese has is a photo of Sarah which he has to watch burn. He can't even have that comfort anymore. John Connor is mentioned several times, and he's of course the only beacon of light, but we never see him and he's not really explored. So even hearing about John doesn't fill us with hope or get us off the hook. Hearing about him instead fills us with a sense of, oh thank God there was someone, But it doesn't sound like John's life was spectacular either. Even though he won, we don't get the feeling that there was much for him to even win back. Of course, the second film starts to bring in some more optimistic ideas in regard to John, the future and morality. But in this first film, any glimmers of hope are fleeting moments that are gone as quick as they came. But that makes this film stand out. It's a brave and ambitious work, and it needed to be this dark, so that the slightly more hopeful sequel worked as well as it did, opening up a more sensitive side to the Terminator saga. With the Terminator, James Cameron was fully dedicated to the idea of a ticking time bomb, a future bearing down a constant Grim Reaper hunting for humanity. Not only is Sarah being relentlessly chased through the film, humanity is too, because the Terminator represents our inevitable fate. There's no room for hope, not yet. That will come later. For now, this is a film that grabs you by the throat and only loosens its grip for a few milliseconds at a time. You are completely at the film's mercy, and after you've experienced the Terminator, because it is an experience, your movie watching life will never be the same.
Come with me if you want to live.
After the Terminator was a surprise hit, director James Cameron was suddenly a force to be reckoned with. After being taken for a bit of a fool by Gale and Hurd in the years prior, when he sold her the Terminator rights for pretty much peanuts, Cameron got his revenge and persuaded Coralco Pictures to purchase the rights from Hurd and Hemdale Film Corporation. The sequel would ultimately go on to be a collaboration between several production studios, as well as Coralco, including Studio Canal, Lightstorm Entertainment and Pacific Western Productions. And in terms of distribution, a deal was struck with TriStar Pictures. Cameron spent 7 weeks writing the script for Terminator 2, once again teaming up with his friend Bill Wisher. Cameron explained this time around he was influenced by such stories as The Wizard of Oz, comparing the T-800 Terminator learning about humanity to the Tin Man receiving a heart in that classic film.
Now I know I've got a heart, because it's breaking.
I know now why you cry.
Originally, Cameron and Wisher considered a concept of Skynet and the Resistance, each sending back T-800 models, both played by Arnold Schwarzenegger, one to terminate John Connor and one to protect him. Eventually they decided a battle between two Arnolds would be boring, and so the idea was scrapped. I mean, we went on to see two Arnolds in Terminator Genesis many years later, and it was pretty cringy and just felt like a gimmick, so I'm glad I didn't go down that road.
I've been waiting for you.
I just keep getting flashbacks to Double Impact with the two Jean-Claude Van Dammes from 1991. Fun film, but definitely not the approach you take for a serious sci-fi sequel. They decided to go back to the drawing board for the T-800's opponent and came up with the T-1000, a liquid metal Terminator who would resemble an average sized human in contrast to Schwarzenegger's huge frame. Michael Biehn was actually the first choice to play the T-1000 in a complete reversal of roles from the first movie. This idea was scrapped too, as Cameron decided it would be too confusing for fans. Yeah, I also don't think that would have worked either. I think we built a real human connection with Kyle Reese in the first movie. It would have felt cheap to just swap him for the sake of shocking the audience. Also up for the T-1000 was, believe it or not, singer Billy Idol, but he sadly injured his leg in a motorcycle crash, and Cameron decided it would be a nice day to start again and cast someone else.
It's a nice day to start again.
Young actor Robert Patrick was actually living in his car when he was considered for the T-1000 role. Cameron wanted a little known actor to contrast with the now hugely famous Schwarzenegger. Patrick nailed the audition, fully understanding the T-1000 needed to be sleek and quick, as well as emotionless. Patrick prepared for the character by studying hunting creatures of nature, such as reptiles, cats and sharks. His facial expressions were based on those of an eagle, and Patrick decided to always keep his head tilted down to imply a continuous focus on moving forward. The actor learned to sprint for the role and managed to master not displaying heavy breathing or exhaustion thanks to specialised training. It's literally crazy how good he is. You honestly don't see him exhale in this film. I always thought his running was distinctly not human, and it's incredible he was able to achieve that effect. Patrick made a huge impact in the role and actually went on to reprise the character for parody appearances in Wayne's World from 1992 and another Schwarzenegger film, Last Action Hero in 1993.
Jack! Did you see that?
It was very important to James Cameron that Linda Hamilton returned as Sarah Connor, and he told Carolco the script would not be finished until he knew if she would be involved or not. Hamilton managed to negotiate a much higher wage than she was paid for the original 1984 film, netting $1 million for Terminator 2. When casting the future savior of the human race, young John Connor, Cameron was determined not to choose an overexposed young actor who everyone knew. Discovering Edward Furlong at the Boys and Girls After School Club in Pasadena, Cameron was immediately drawn to his charisma, which was impressive given Furlong had no acting experience. Cameron took a leap of faith on the youngster and offered him the role. Furlong got stuck in right away, taking acting lessons and then learning how to ride a motorcycle and repair guns. Furlong built some good chemistry early on with Arnold Schwarzenegger, as the young actor had grown up without a father figure, and Schwarzenegger did his best to fill that role, both in front and behind the camera. Linda Hamilton went on to say they were so close that Schwarzenegger's advice for Furlong about women was hilarious to listen to, because to her, they were both emotionally the same age.
If you want to shine them on, it's hasta la vista, baby.
Hasta la vista, baby.
Principal photography for T2 started in October 1990, taking place in and around Los Angeles on an estimated massive budget of $94 to $102 million, making it the most expensive film ever made at the time. The crew, including cinematographer Adam Greenberg, were intimidated by the massive scope of the project. Greenberg ended up collecting 187 walkie-talkies to communicate with the crew, whereas on the original Terminator, he had been able to shout directions to them. Cameron has always been known for his short temper and perfectionist style on set, and that was running rampant throughout Terminator 2, with Schwarzenegger and the crew describing the shoot as draining and Cameron as very demanding, requiring an insane amount of takes for most of the shots. For example, the director spent 5 days simply on close-ups of Linda Hamilton when she invades the home of Joe Morton's character, Miles Dyson. Filming occurred at several significant locations. The famous scene when both Terminators are stalking John was filmed inside Santa Monica Place Mall, with some exterior shots captured at Northridge Fashion Center. In the following chase scene, filmed at the Bull Creek Spillway, Patrick's training had been so pitch perfect that he was actually able to outrun Edward Furlong's dirt bike, so the bike's max speed ended up being increased. Robert Patrick literally became Sonic the Hedgehog on this set, I think we can say. The scenes set at Pascadero State Hospital were captured at Lakeview Terrace Hospital, and Linda Hamilton went on to say that during the hospital elevator sequence, she suffered permanent partial hearing loss after not wearing earplugs during the exposure to loud noises and gunfire. The destruction of the Cyberdyne Systems building was filmed at an abandoned office in San Jose, which was scheduled to be demolished. During these epic scenes, Cameron went as far as using real members of the Los Angeles SWAT division, although their tactics and style were exaggerated to make the scene as interesting and exciting as possible. For the incredible effects that are still heralded to this day, 4 companies were actually involved. Industrial Light and Magic were behind the computer generated effects, Stan Winston's studio came up with the prosthetics and animatronics, Fantasy 2 developed the miniatures and optical effects, and 4 World Productions created a nuclear explosion for Sarah Connor's nightmare sequence. The CGI effects were brand new for the time, and the computer systems cost thousands of dollars alone. Although the visual effects for the T-1000 are only actually on screen for 5 minutes of the film, the process was so complex that to render only 15 seconds of footage, the team had to be working for up to 10 days.
Go!
Special effects legend Stan Winston spent hours examining nuclear test footage in order to make Sarah's terrifying dream look as real and frightening as possible. A miniature model of Los Angeles was built to simulate the events. After each take, it would take 2 days to set the model back up to shoot again. In 1991, US federal testing labs unofficially declared the nightmare scene in Terminator 2 as the most accurate depiction of a nuclear blast ever created for a motion picture, and the special effects team have gone on to say that no scene they have ever worked on since has ever received the unanimous amount of praise that this one did.
And it was the one time when it got a little uncomfortable because it wasn't pleasant to look at while you were shooting it. But it is the important aspect of the film.
Believe it or not, the decision to give away the twist that Schwarzenegger's T-800 was the good guy this time was made by none other than James Cameron. Cameron defended the decision years later, saying it wasn't a Sixth Sense kind of twist that's revealed only at the end of the film, so he was happy to lead with the strongest story element to sell the movie. I understand what he's saying, but imagine sitting there in the cinema completely unaware that Arnold was the hero. It'd probably be one of the most mind-blowing film watching experiences ever. At the same time, I don't think even if Cameron wanted to, there was any way he could have kept that reveal a secret. So I guess why not lead with it and take advantage of Arnold's popularity at the time. Terminator 2's premiere was a big time event, taking place on July 1st, 1991 at the Cineplex Odeon in Century City, Los Angeles. It was treated with of course a lot more reverence than the premiere for the Terminator, during which the audience was quite skeptical and supposedly even laughed at the wrong times. Reportedly at the T2 premiere, everyone was in awe, and attendance included such huge celebrities as Nicolas Cage, Sylvester Stallone, Sharon Stone and Michael Douglas. The movie was released in the United States and Canada on July 3rd, 1991. Over the 5-day Independence Day weekend, T2 netted $52.3 million, becoming the second highest opening 5-day total ever, hot on the heels of 1989's Batman, which bagged $57 million. One theatre chain executive remarked that nothing since Batman had created the ticket frenzy they experienced, and that word-of-mouth buzz was phenomenal. The film benefited hugely from repeat viewings by young audience members. An industry professional, Lawrence Kasanoff, said it was no secret that despite the R rating, a great deal of children were seeing Terminator 2, and this was likely because of the marketing leading up to the release. Arnold was the action hero for youngsters and teens at the time, and the studio did not shy away from releasing toys and merchandise in promotion of the film. This was back in those crazy days when violent franchises such as Terminator, Rambo and Robocop literally marketed at children, and also didn't water anything down in the movie. If you were a kid in the 80s and 90s, you had it made. You were the audience, but you weren't talked down to at all. Well, apart from in Robocop 3. Yeah. Worldwide, Terminator 2 smashed several box office records. In the UK, it had a record 3-day opening weekend of 4.4 million and a 1 week of 7.8 million, going on to gross at least 30. The movie also made waves elsewhere in Europe, crossing 9 million in France and 8 in Germany. Overall, T2 nailed it in Japan too, accumulating over 51 million in all. The film is estimated to have collected a worldwide massive total of at least 520 million, making it the highest grossing film of 1991, and at the time, the third highest grossing film ever, behind 1977's Star Wars and 1982's E.T.
This is deep.
A special edition laserdisc of the film was released in 1993, featuring a 15-minute extended version that restored all the deleted scenes, and interviews with the cast and crew. Cameron made a point to say he did not believe this was a director's cut because he considered the theatrical release to be the definitive version and the extended cut just a chance to go a bit more in depth due to the limitations of the theatrical running time. In the year 2000, more deleted scenes were released on the Ultimate Edition DVD, including the first time we saw that more sentimental alternate ending. Terminator 2 received almost unanimous critical acclaim, with Janet Maslin remarking she placed Cameron's work on T2 up there with Stanley Kubrick. The Austin Chronicle, despite enjoying the film, said it conveyed a muddled message about protecting the value of human life and preventing war, because it still used guns and violence to get there. Famous movie critics Roger Ebert and Gene Siskel both heaped praise on Terminator 2, praising the cast and performances.
One nice touch here, this Terminator has been ordered by the little boy to try not to kill people, which is a little bit of a difference for these special effects pictures.
Well, the other thing is, I want to go into some of the other casting, because Schwarzenegger does what he always does, but, you know, they could have cast a big Dolph Lundgren type as the bad guy here, and they picked this Robert Patrick, and he doesn't have a lot of charisma, but they knew that you cast this sort of slight guy, and he's somehow more lethal because he isn't obviously macho. Linda Hamilton is very good. She's got a neck as big as strong as Schwarzenegger's. She's tough. She isn't made into a sex object, but she's a real presence there, powerful. It's terrific.
Rolling Stone critic Peter Travers was a little sceptical of the film's ending, saying the T-800's death scene was a cornball moment that was out of place. How dare you? I love that moment. Yes, even the thumbs up. I cried, okay. Terminator 2 is set many years after the events of the first film. Sarah Connor has been admitted to a mental hospital due to the impending doom of Judgment Day consuming her mind, and her young son John is now living with a foster family. The deadly T-1000 Terminator has been sent back through time to target young John, but the human resistance have been able to intercept, reprogramming a T-800 model to protect him. As a sequel, Terminator 2 is one of the most creative ever made. Not only is it a fantastic film, but it succeeds where so many sequels don't. It wasn't cranked out just to capitalise or repeat the first movie. It actually had something to say and boundaries to push. James Cameron had gained so much confidence in the run-up to Terminator 2. I mean, he just made Aliens, for goodness sake. He was on a roll and proved he could make a masterpiece sequel. And that newfound self-belief just radiates from the screen in Terminator 2. I mean, he literally changed the genre from the first film to the second. How many sequels do that? And it made complete sense. We'd seen the down and dirty horror film, and now with Terminator 2, the stakes were even higher, so it became sci-fi action spectacle that keeps you on the edge of your seat. While the Terminator is downbeat and foreboding, Terminator 2 is a little more triumphant and positive, as our characters decide to fight back and try and destroy Skynet. The action genre is perfect for that. We get pumped up and root for the characters in these grand scale set pieces. There's so many action scenes that stand out, but the Galleria is one of my favourites. That sequence is so wonderfully built. Every shot matters, every footstep closer to John counts, and it's such a shift from how the Terminator searches for Sarah in the first film. In T2, both Terminators are marching high speed to find John, and neither are waiting for anything. Like Sarah says in the intro to the film, it was just a question of which one of them would reach him first. There was such a sense of urgency, and it's a glorious movie moment when the T-800, at the last second, is revealed to be the good guy.
Get down.
As soon as it's established that Arnold is now the good guy, the film aggressively shifts into another gear. Arnold was on top of the world at the time, and to see him carrying this sci-fi epic on his shoulders as the protagonist, with this horrifying villain no one had ever seen anything like before in the T-1000 coming after him, it all just felt so big time and unmissable. The bond that develops between John and the Terminator highlights the strength of emotional connections in the midst of chaos. John immediately befriends the Terminator, which perfectly communicates John's kindness and his ability to see beyond the surface. I mean, he literally becomes best friends with the very thing that is part of what eventually destroys the world, because he knows this one has been programmed to protect him. So to him it stands out from the others. Many of us, even at a young idealistic age, would probably still accept the Terminator's help, but never make the effort John does to communicate and befriend him. John always meets people, or machines obviously, where they are at. Another example of this is when he stops Sarah killing Miles Dyson, because John realises that while Dyson does go on to do something terrible, he hasn't done it yet. John is able to give everyone a chance. John has an uncanny gift to see beyond the black and white and work with anyone. A clear example of why John could go on to be the future leader of humanity. Arnold Schwarzenegger achieves what a lot of us would have deemed impossible on paper, making us feel something for the Terminator. He was one of the most terrifying and memorable movie villains of all time, and then somehow in the second film it really works that he's the hero. But the way it's delivered is a big part of why it works. We are not presented with a Terminator who is suddenly simply a good guy. He's still a Terminator, and the film makes that clear. Even the machine himself is well aware he is simply being reprogrammed.
Jesus, you're gonna kill that guy!
course. I'm a Terminator.
So early on, his hero status is achieved by following commands, but by the end of the film, he has earned it because he genuinely wants it. It's very powerful and meaningful to see a machine go on this journey of discovering not only why he's doing what he's doing, but why he should be doing it too. It's one of the truest journeys towards goodness ever on film, because the Terminator has no self-interest in it. He arrives there because it's right, not because it benefits him. Arnold does incredibly well still bringing the menace of the Terminator, but slowly but surely opening up his curious side. It's a big part of his interactions with John. The Terminator is almost childlike with his expressions and fascination as John teaches him, and we as an audience are forced to realise that the Terminator is quite simply a blank slate. Whatever goes in is what comes out, so it helps us warm to him and realise that he didn't actually choose to be the killing machine he originally was, and it's possible for him to be something more.
I swear I will not kill anyone.
One of the best things about John Connor is he is simply a normal kid. Sure, he's a bit of a tearaway and gets in trouble, but that's understandable considering he's lost his mother and be put in a foster home. When it comes down to it, John is ultimately good-hearted. He restores Sarah's faith in humanity, and he builds a belief in humanity from scratch for the Terminator. I think it was essential to have John be a child in this film because obviously as we get older, we get more jaded and give up on our optimism. And it takes someone who is not as world weary and still values every human life to change the paradigm. While he's a regular good-hearted kid, John has that little extra bit of empathy in regard to the idea of taking human life, and this little spark allows us to believe that he will grow up to be the leader of humanity. When the Terminator tells John that committing a kill could actually prevent the war, John is truly disgusted and says he doesn't care. And of course when he goes to stop his mother from committing that kill, she looks at him in shock that he came to stop her, but then realises, oh, of course you did. You're John Connor.
You came here to stop me. Yeah, I did. I love you, John. I always have.
That is such a beautiful moment, and it's touching to see Sarah's soul once again come alive because of her son. Up to this moment she was dead inside, but when the kindness and humanity of her son hits her like a ton of bricks, her entire outlook changes. She's a mother again and her hope has been restored. It's a wonderful example of the power of love and how it might just overcome the doom that is possibly coming for the human race. And while I said it's John's optimism that's so important, it's also his humour and cocky vibe that makes him even more likeable. He could have filled the role that a lot of children do in movies where their innocence and kindness is casting judgment over everyone else. But in Terminator 2, John is still able to be a fun-loving, mischievous kid, and when his moral outlook does come into it, it feels natural because he has just made us laugh and feel relaxed with it. He's not trying to judge the adult characters, instead he just wants everyone to work together. It's his actions when the important events come up that matter, and he pulls you over to his side because, like all good leaders, he persuades by example. John gets a father figure in the Terminator. The machine is there for him with care, protection and companionship. The film brings up a fascinating idea that, scarily enough, AI could actually make for a better parent for a child than many regular people. Of course, countless human fathers are not there for their children, so the film suggests, well, if you could have a machine that ticks all the boxes, but just doesn't have the emotions that the real father isn't providing anyway, why not? It's a thought-provoking discussion, and is accompanied by one of Sarah's best pieces of dialogue in the whole movie.
The Terminator would never stop. It would never leave him, and it would never hurt him, never shout at him or get drunk and hit him, say it was too busy to spend time with him. It would always be there, and it would die to protect him. In an insane world, it was the sanest choice.
Sarah Connor is haunted by the impending doom of Judgment Day and is carrying that immeasurable weight on her shoulders. Because they threw her in a mental ward, Sarah has lost her belief in humanity, and now everyone else is basically a nuisance to her. She views them as annoying little people who just don't understand. Sarah ends up resenting the very thing she is trying to save, and becomes more similar to the Terminators she hates than her fellow humans. The biggest tragedy of all of this is that she forgets how to be a mother to her son, treating him as an object that needs to be locked away instead of a child worthy of love and affection. It's heartbreaking to see the disconnect between her and John when they first meet again. Sarah has become so cold, and her mindset has become so blinded by the future, she forgets to live in the now. However, she's still sympathetic, and that's a testament to the writing and of course Linda Hamilton's heavyweight performance. We really do feel and understand why she would have ended up this way. And because we saw the first Terminator, we know there's a good person underneath. Sarah believes she has no choice to be like this because the Grim Reaper of the future has already made the decision for her. We of course get to see Sarah's nightmarish visions, and I'll never forget them. That moment where she is watching a young version of herself with John and is trying to warn her, but no one can hear, and then suddenly the world is decimated in a few seconds, is honestly as terrifying as anything in the first Terminator, and that's the movie of the two that's seen as the horror film. This moment is shocking, it's sad, it's epic, it's uncompromising, and it deserves to be noticed more by the people who claim this movie lightens things up a bit too much. Linda Hamilton's portrayal of Sarah is nothing less than extraordinary. She brings an unparalleled intensity and authenticity to the character, capturing the essence of a woman pushed to the limit. Her physical transformation for the role, including her muscular physique, solidified her commitment to the character and the development of female figures in action films. She's one of the strongest female characters ever, and fully holds her own alongside Schwarzenegger, the biggest male action hero of the time. Robert Patrick is truly unforgettable as the T-1000. His portrayal was both mesmerising and haunting. It's one of the best examples ever of a complete physical transformation on film. Patrick's eyes scan the environment, he's focused, analysing anything and everything, not missing a single detail because he's ridiculously meticulous. It's terrifying when you look into his eyes because you know what's behind them. It's a void when it comes to humanity and empathy, but a whole world when it comes to stalking, analysing and killing. Of course, the CGI used set a new standard for visual storytelling, and I'm still blown away by the effects to this day. The most memorable scenes that showcase the T-1000's capabilities for me are the chase sequences as the machine relentlessly pursues our heroes, morphing through many different forms, effortlessly adapting to its environment. These moments perfectly demonstrate the power of visual effects in creating a sense of awe and in suspense, and also highlight the true horror of this villain because he's literally able to use the everyday things and people you experience in the world against you. He could be anything, he could be anywhere. He has all the capabilities of every creature from your worst nightmares, but in the real world. Terminator 2 of course discussed AI before everyone on Earth was obsessed with AI. Skynet is an example of the fears everyone has of AI going wrong and becoming a destructive force. Characters of the T-1000 and the T-800 provide contrasting perspectives on AI. The T-800 evolves and showcases the potential for AI to adapt and learn empathy. On the other hand, the T-1000 shows the dangers of AI without moral constraints, and also the continuous improvement for improvement's sake, until before we know it, monsters have been created. The film raises up some interesting ideas in regards to the Miles Dyson character, played by Joe Morton. He's a man obsessed with science and forward thinking. He's ultimately responsible for putting the wheels in motion for the Skynet to take over, but he doesn't know that. And he's not a bad person. He's the perfect example of the dilemma humans have put themselves in when it comes to technology. We can't help but keep pushing the envelope, obsessed with the next thing and the next development. And it's not bad people always doing it. And before you even know it, something seriously dangerous has been created when it didn't come from a malicious place. When Miles Dyson discovers what he creates will destroy the world, he joins Sarah and the others to try and destroy Skynet. However, there's fascinating little moments with this character because he almost regrets having to do it. It's this battle he has with his ambition, even when he finds out the consequences.
It was scary stuff, radically advanced. I mean, it was smashed, it didn't work, but it gave us ideas, took us in new directions. I mean, things we would have never...
You can tell that he still wishes he could have carried on with the work and took it in a different direction. T2 is a cautionary tale, but at the same time the film doesn't condemn Dyson. Instead, we're encouraged to understand him, and to realise that it's not moral for Sarah to judge Dyson as she does, Instead, we are forced to see him as a real person and confront the fact that a lot of the people we think are doing bad things very likely don't realise the ultimate effects. It's far more nuanced than simply stating they're evil and out of control. T2 confronts the painful truth that sometimes fatal, unintended actions can come from the best of people. But despite all these ideas, incredible themes and stunning performances, like I said earlier, it's a fantastic popcorn action film. You can tell that Terminator 2 inspired filmmakers such as Christopher Nolan and many others to actually make something serious and believable, but still have it be as fun as any action film out there. I mean, there are so many action scenes I could talk about. Obviously that first chase scene with the T-800 on the motorbike and the T-1000 chasing John in a truck is stunning. There's a wonderful use of tight camera angles, quick cuts, intense music, incredible sound design. I mean, the weight of everything going on is sensational. You feel and hear the vehicles to your core. It's captivating. That first chase scene kind of sets the stage for the entire film, and it's not even especially that long either. It's just a few minutes where action cinema was changed forever. That image of Arnie on that motorcycle with the shotgun is ingrained in my mind. And of course, John on that little bike with a gigantic truck closing in. It's one of the most threatening images you've ever seen. The Terminator driving off a ramp to reach him. That stunt always gets me pumped up. This scene just feels incredibly big time and leaves me in awe. And whenever I watch it, I feel like that young child again watching T2 for the first time. And of course, there's countless fantastic action scenes in the film, like that final chase scene. That feels so haunting because it's set at night and the blue metallic tone adds to that impending feeling of the T-1000 closing in. There's just so much action brilliance on screen, and I would still go as far as to say this film probably contains the greatest action scenes of all time. Terminator 2 Judgment Day changed blockbuster cinema forever. It's an incredible piece of work that broke down the barriers between action and profound cinema and proved they could exist together. Arnold Schwarzenegger's career skyrocketed even further because of this film, and the T-800 character became a pop culture icon as famous as any movie character in history. James Cameron became the Titanic force he is today. See what I did there? And this is just one of those movies that stands alone, confidently surpassing its already fantastic predecessor and still standing tall above action films of today. Terminator 2 is timeless. It will always be compelling and entertaining, and as the AI revolution draws even closer, it will remain relevant for decades to come.
You here to kill me?
No. You must live.
Terminator 3 is one of the most controversial and divisive sequels ever made. As far back as 1991, James Cameron was open to the idea of a third Terminator film, saying if T2 was a success, a sequel might materialise. However, after T2's release and a huge box office, Cameron seemed to have a change of heart, saying he believed the story was over. Of course, the industry had other ideas, with Coralco Pictures co-founder Mario Casar confidently stating in 1992 that Terminator 3 would be made in the next 5 to 7 years. Ambitious of him. However, instead of making Terminator 3, something else happened to Coralco within that time frame, namely they went bankrupt.
You gotta be shitting me.
No, I am not shitting you.
20th Century Fox immediately pursued a $50 million deal to acquire all of Coralco's assets, including the rights to Terminator 3. However, the company withdrew their offer by 1996, losing out to Canal Plus, who inked a deal for $58 million. This deal included everything the company owned except for the future sequels, though Fox still intended to grab them because the plan was for the rights to be auctioned through the US bankruptcy court. James Cameron again was floating around the idea of a third entry, and he was excited to unveil his latest project, a 3D ride at Universal Studios called Terminator 2 3D Battle Across Time.
Whoa, where are we?
The future. Final battle between humans and machines.
The cast of T2 returned for the ride, and the idea served as a spark for Cameron to start writing Terminator 3, and he called Battle Across Time a stepping stone to the film.
However, a large ship by the name of the Titanic sailed in to stop Cameron getting around to it, and his involvement was derailed. Meanwhile, Fox was still keen to make T3 a reality, negotiating for most of 1997 to try and get those pesky rights. Factors like the budget issues and Cameron's troubled post-production for Titanic eventually led to Fox abandoning their pursuit of Terminator 3, and the rights were auctioned to Coralco co-founder Andrew Vajna. Vajna had apparently quietly negotiated to acquire the rights, unbeknownst to Fox and even his friend, James Cameron. Vajna claimed he had no idea Cameron was again planning T3, as it was hard to keep track of where he stood on the project. However, this event led to James Cameron finally stepping back from all plans for Terminator 3, and the kicker for Vajna was that without Cameron, Arnold Schwarzenegger initially refused to return to his iconic role.
I'm the party pooper.
James Cameron was the only one Schwarzenegger trusted when it came to the Terminator franchise, and so when his friend reportedly told him that he did not want him to miss out on T3 because of him, Arnold changed his mind and decided to come back. Schwarzenegger explained that Cameron essentially told him if it's a good script and a lot of money, he shouldn't think twice about taking the part. An early script for Terminator 3 featured John Connor working in a .com company, and the Terminator pursuing him was referred to as the T1G, a female machine with the ability to turn invisible. Now that James Cameron's arm was definitely not for the twisting whatsoever, other directors started to be considered, including David Fincher, John McTiernan, Roland Emmerich and Ang Lee, who actually turned the film down to direct 2003's fellow huge release, Hulk. By early 2001, lesser known director Jonathan Mostow and his producer friend Hal Lieberman were in talks to direct and produce. Mostow requested the screenplay was reworked by his friends, screenwriting duo John Brancato and Michael Ferris, who wrote the forgotten 1995 Sandra Bullock movie, The Net. The intention was to make T3 more of a road movie, following the general format of the first two films, because according to the writers, every time they tried something too different, it just didn't seem to work. The idea of a female Terminator was one of the big things that remained from the original script, although the machine being able to turn invisible was scrapped, with Mostow saying it was a step too far. Mostow also made a point of wanting to emphasise how obsolete Schwarzenegger's Terminator was compared to the TX. The director loved how outmatched he was in Terminator 2 and wanted to recreate that sympathy and underdog feeling again for the third movie. Originally, Edward Furlong was due to reprise his role as John Connor. However, in December 2001, the actor dropped out of the project due to his substance abuse problems. Nick Starr was eventually cast as John, with Mostow saying he believed the actor could bring a certain emotional depth to the role. Linda Hamilton turned down the offer to reprise her iconic role as Sarah Connor. She stated the reasons for this was that Terminator 3 offered nothing new for her character, and it was ultimately a script that focused on the Terminator and John. At one point, the idea of the female Terminator was almost dropped, with Vin Diesel's name floating around to play a male version of the TX. Finally, lesser known actress Christina Loken, who was best known for appearing in the TV series Mortal Kombat Conquest, was offered the part in early 2002. In preparation for the huge role, Loken underwent 6 weeks of training consisting of weights, fighting and weapons, and also gained 14 pounds of muscle and took a mime class to develop the robotic movements of the TX, also taking inspiration from Robert Patrick, the iconic T-1000 from Terminator 2. For the part of Kate Brewster, John Connor's love interest, young actress Sophie Bush was originally cast. However, once filming started, Mostow started to feel like she looked too young for the part and replaced her with Claire Danes of Romeo and Juliet fame. Danes was on set the day after she was hired. Tensions arose early on between Arnold Schwarzenegger and Jonathan Mostow, as the veteran action star missed working with his friend James Cameron. However, by the end of the first week, Schwarzenegger started to believe Mostow was the right man for the job. Arnold performed a lot of his own stunts, but one was the insane chase scene involving the TX driving a mobile crane, as Schwarzenegger's Terminator hangs onto the crane arm as he is smashed through multiple obstacles and buildings.
Remember the hours and the days and the weeks that I spent hanging on a hook of a huge monster crane
and get dragged behind this crane and get smashed into things with this crane. I mean, it was like unbelievable scenes, but it was really close calls many times.
The scene required 14 cameras because the crew only had one chance to film it. Schwarzenegger said it was the one time he was nervous doing a stunt because despite every safety precaution being used, there were many close calls. That's insane that a 50-year-old Arnold at the time had the guts to do something like this. What a legend. As for some of the other explosive moments, the team constructed flawless, life-size robotic replicas of Arnold and Christina Loken because certain moments were simply too dangerous for them to appear in. So yeah, there actually were robots created of the robotic characters in the film. So essentially a T-101 and a TX literally existed. Mental. After making such an impact in Terminator 2, Industrial Light and Magic and Stan Winston returned to build the replicas and the special effects for the film. Winston constructed the T-1, an early Terminator machine that appears near the end of the film, when the machines are beginning to rise. Winston said he based the design on being part tank, part robot, creating 5 of them, all controlled by hydraulics. The bathroom battle scene between the two Terminators included a huge amount of visual effects and CGI, and Mostel went on to say this was one of the most complicated CGI sequences in the movie. Arnold tried to play the Terminator physically on screen as much as he could, and for his final appearance in the film when he is broken down and, as per his phrase in Terminator 2, needs a vacation, Arnold's Terminator form was a mix of his real body, prosthetics and CGI. The marketing for Terminator 3 was incredible. I remember the hype as I was a young teen at the time and had grown up loving the first 2 movies. That first teaser was pure goosebumps. It's one of the best teaser trailers of all time. Check it out, it might bring back some awesome memories. That trailer takes me back to a time when of course the internet wasn't the behemoth it is today, and you had to wait for anything about this movie to surface, and when that trailer did, it was like the world stood still. Terminator 3 premiered at Mann Village Theatre in Westwood, Los Angeles on June 30th, 2003, with its full US release taking place on July 2nd. The film captured 12.5 million on its first day, 44 million on its opening weekend, and ultimately ended up with 150 million in the US and Canada overall. The film went on to earn a full worldwide gross of 433.4 million. The movie was the 8th highest grossing of 2003, with Finding Nemo at number 1 and movies such as Pirates of the Caribbean, Curse of the Black Pearl and The Matrix Reloaded ahead of it. It was a massive year for movies when you look back, and Warner Brothers stated they still looked at T3 as a huge success. Critically, the film didn't do especially well, although some praised it as a good action film. Critics such as Roger Ebert were disappointed.
I just think this movie just didn't try as hard to be constantly stimulating and interesting and original and exciting. It just went for all the computerized special effects and all the chases and all the explosions, and I'm so tired of chases and explosions.
I remember coming out of T3 thinking something about it just didn't feel right. I, like many other fans, disliked the dismissive approach the film took to establish ideas in Terminator 2. The casting choices and some of the comedic moments in the script were also off-putting. Fast forward years later, several Terminator sequels have been released, and many fans are actually starting to rethink Terminator 3, realising that perhaps the biggest problem was the hype, and when you compare it to the Terminator movies we've got since, it's actually not as bad as you remember. Jonathan Mostow spoke out about this subject recently and stated that the problem with T3 was the fact that Terminator 2 was such a seminal movie, it would have been practically impossible to blow people away. James Cameron had a very interesting reaction over the years, to say the least, at the time calling Terminator 3 great, but rethinking his praise years later, going on to state Terminator Genesis was the real Terminator 3, until he got back involved with the franchise and made Terminator Dark Fate, which, funnily enough, he also called the real Terminator 3. Come on, James.
Talk to the hand.
Terminator 3 takes place several years after the events of Terminator 2. The audience are reunited with a now adult John Connor, who, after hoping he had changed the future at the end of the first film, is forced to come to terms with the fact that he and his mother failed, and a deadly TX has been sent back in time to eliminate him. Of course, the T-101 model Terminator is back to protect him, just as he did years before, and the fight for the future takes place once again in the present. Many fans were upset with the new take on John Connor specifically, but I have to say, for what they were going for, I think Nick's style is quite good. It's obviously not where I would have gone with the character personally, but he at least delivers as this paranoid mess of a man who has lived his whole life looking over his shoulder. Nick Stahl manages to convey several scenes with genuine conviction and believability, and while he's not the Edward Furlong John Connor, I do completely buy him as a different John Connor.
Imagine if you knew you were going to do something important with your life, something amazing. I mean, maybe the most important thing anyone has ever done. But there's a catch. Something terrible has to happen. The life you know, all the stuff that you take for granted, it's not gonna last.
Perhaps the most disappointing thing about this version of the character is that one of the things I loved about John in T2 was his optimism, his belief in humanity, and his desire to work with everyone. You could see how he would go on to be a leader. Literally all of that is gone with John in T3. He's a complete mess. And I'm in two minds about it, because I have to admit, where John has ended up in T3 is actually quite realistic and believable. I've never heard anyone bring up the fact that John, in a way, ends up exactly where his mother ended up in T2. He's become alienated, terrified and unstable, just as his mother was. While you could call that a T2 rehash, for me I think it's an interesting way of going full circle and connecting John to his mother. And when you look back, John helped his mother out of that mindset, and then sadly years later ends up the same. Very nihilistic idea, but to be honest it goes along with the more hopeless feeling of the original Terminator, the fact that these characters can't run from their fate. Terminator 3 actually returns the franchise to its themes of inevitability and hopelessness. There's no way of changing the future as there was in Terminator 2. Sadly, these elements kind of went over people's heads, probably because all the misplaced comedy and bad lines distracted them. John didn't stop Judgment Day. The world is indeed going to end, and he is forced to take on this terrifying burden that he never wanted. You could kind of liken the situation with T3 to the dilemma they had with Alien 3 in that franchise, when it stripped away the happy ending of the previous film, and then wanted to go dark and bleak again. Whether you like it comes down to either your own personal preferences, or perhaps, like me, took a long time for you to get there, but you can see the positives now. I think in order to make films like Alien 3 and T3, sequels to films that have been wrapped up so well, you have to tear up at least some of the previous film in order to have a story, to have jeopardy and adversity again. You can't really have it both ways whether you like it or not. You either say no, I don't want it full stop, or you have to accept that if you're going to get a Terminator 3, there has to be a compromise. There's going to have to be changes in order to keep it going. It's kind of a catch-22. One of the other things fans criticise this new John Connor for is that he seems to be, according to them, pretty stupid. He asks the Terminator if he remembers him, despite knowing full well the Terminator he knew descended into the flames in Terminator 2. It frustrated a lot of fans because they interpreted it that the writers seemingly hadn't even watched T2.
You remember me? Sarah Connor? Blowing up Cyberdyne? Hasta la vista, baby? Ring any bells?
That was a different T-101.
I agreed with this take for a long time until I watched this film for this review with my partner, and she brought up some pretty good points. What you have to remember is John met the Terminator as a child and was clearly traumatized by his final sacrifice. So this would stay with him as an adult, and he would have a very strong emotional bond to the Terminator. But perhaps he spoke from the heart, and because of his boyhood experience and the fact he's unstable now, he had such a strong reaction to seeing the Terminator again, it made him speak very quickly from emotion. Or perhaps his brain told him, well, maybe that Terminator possibly escaped somehow, some way, because we know Terminators can survive insane things. Maybe at the last second something happened. Also, we have no evidence that John would have known that multiple Terminators look like the one he knew as a kid. Only Sarah knew that. I see no reason why John would know that all Terminators of the same model look the same. I don't see why Sarah would have told him that. Seeing the Terminator would have brought back all these childhood emotions for him. He wouldn't be thinking straight. So when people say, oh, they didn't watch the second film, they made John stupid, I no longer agree. I think this whole scene was about the connection they had, tying it back to the second film, and showing us clearly where John was at mentally. Christina Loken is clearly extremely dedicated to her role as the TX, and you could see the influence that Robert Patrick has on her, because she really has taken a lot from the T-1000 for this performance. The laser focus and the emotionless stare is on point, and the way she delivers her lines are so methodical and creepy.
No.
She does suffer a bit from the whole bigger is better ideas, like okay, now we need an even more incredible Terminator than the T-1000. It becomes a bit gimmicky. It's like, now she can control other machines, now she can shoot out of her arm, now she can squeeze Arnold's balls, you know. Just, it was a symptom of where the franchise was going. The Terminator series became about topping itself rather than making it make sense. That doesn't mean the TX isn't entertaining. I mean, that scene where she takes over the body of Catherine's fiance and then puts her arm through the body of a police officer and drives the car is bloody mental. It's one of the craziest and most brutal moments in the Terminator franchise, so there is some fun to be had with the TX. Catherine Brewster, played by Claire Danes, is actually a very important character in Terminator 3. As the film progresses, she is revealed to be John's future wife, and her survival is crucial for the success of the Resistance. Initially, Catherine is somewhat naive and sheltered, but after the TX slaughters her fiance and her father too, she is forced to grow up and develop resilience, which eventually becomes determination to help John Connor. I have to be honest, despite her being a pretty decent character, Claire Danes just isn't fantastic, and when you're missing the talent of Linda Hamilton, she doesn't really live up to being the third main character. However, she isn't terrible. It's a little bit of a hit and miss performance, where in moments she doesn't fully nail Catherine's confusion and sadness, and at other times she does. It's just a performance that never really comes together. However, the idea of her character and what she means to John and the timeline kind of makes up for that. She represents the main ideas of Terminator 3 that, in the end, we actually cannot change our fate. Within T3's timeline, John and Catherine were always going to meet. T3 takes a different approach, delving into ideas of free will and determinism that suggest you might be able to change the way it comes about, but not the fact that it does. I've always been fascinated with the concept of free will and choices, and whether or not we are all just blindly going down a path already decided for us. Somehow this film actually makes the arrival of Judgment Day horrific, but dare I say it, bittersweet at the same time, because John and Catherine are hand in hand at the end of the film, realising that while we might not have been able to stop Judgment Day, there is always some good even in the greatest bad, and rebuilding is what humanity will always do. And I think one of the unique elements that people ignore was T3's setting in the film actually on Judgment Day, the day the machines rise. It's a very effective idea, because that scene where the Terminator tells John and Catherine it's happening today, and we see John's reaction, always sends a chill up my spine.
Judgment Day. The end of the world. Today, 3 hours from now.
The concept of being told on the day the world's going to end that it's going to end in a few hours is haunting. It's always stuck with me. I think it's a very powerful moment. And it ends with John realising that sometimes our destiny is not to stop the terrible things that happen, but to learn and grow from them. Even dare I say it, with the end of the world. These are challenging ideas, and the fact that T3, a film that has over the years been accused of being dumb, actually goes there and discusses this incredibly complicated theme of gaining something good from something truly terrible, the fact it even goes there proves that T3 is actually a lot bolder and braver than many viewers gave it credit for. That ending is one of the best in the franchise. It stands for something different than the T2 ending obviously, but I think it's just as meaningful and heartfelt. This is another moment where Nick Stahl's performance is very earnest, and that quiet moment of realization and coming full circle is very, very good and wraps up the film so well.
Somebody please come in. Is anybody out there? We're under CQ. Is anybody there?
This is John Connor. Crystal Peak.
Connor? What the hell is happening? Who's in charge there?
I am.
Arnold Schwarzenegger is pretty decent in the film. He will never match his iconic moment in time role from the first two movies, but to be honest, in T3 he still nails the character and he's still just as cool. You have to respect Arnold getting into good shape and diving headfirst into the stunts, and while some of the comedy is pretty cringe, some of his one-liners do genuinely work.
Tell her who I am.
John Connor is leader of the worldwide resistance and last best hope of humankind.
One of Arnold's best scenes is when the TX has corrupted his system. I think it could have come across as laughable, but Arnold's committed performance sees it through. It's an interesting idea to see the Terminator fighting against his own system, which has been taken over by a more advanced machine. It's very, very intriguing. It's something we hadn't seen before, and Arnold delivers one of the best lines in the film, reminding John that while he may be there to protect him, programming can change that in a second, and sadly there is ultimately no real relationship between them.
You don't want to do this! Desire is irrelevant. I am a machine.
This is a different relationship than John and the Terminator had in T2. The Terminator and John never really bond. It really is a connection based on the mission. The Terminator constantly reiterates who John needs to become, and the relationship is all business. An example of this is when the Terminator informs John that, in the future, he actually terminated him.
I killed you.
A far cry from the father and son connection and the Terminator discovering morality in T2. Terminator 3 keeps him as a no-nonsense Terminator, and that was probably a very wise move. The Terminator and John's back and forth is instead about fate, responsibility, and never giving up. The Terminator teaches John to keep fighting through his unflinching tunnel vision, so there is something John gains from the Terminator in this film, but it's very different to what young John received in Terminator 2.
Our destiny was never to stop Judgment Day. It was merely to survive it. Together. The Terminator knew. He tried to tell us. But I didn't want to hear it. All I know is what the Terminator taught me. Never stop fighting. And I never will. The battle has just begun.
While the action isn't quite up to the iconic caliber of Terminator 2, T3 still has some pretty amazing action scenes. Everyone likes to talk about that crane chase, and yeah, it's mental. Now I know that Arnold literally did these stunts, it kind of blows me away. I was reluctant to call this a great action scene for years because I just compared it to T2's chase where the two Terminators pursue John outside the Galleria, but I think that wasn't fair. If you just look at it without that darn comparing, it's an adrenaline pumping chase scene of its own. It's pretty great. Mostow is no James Cameron, but he does have you enthralled and picks his shots well. There's cars and God knows what flying left and right. It's mayhem. There's other action that's good too, a few more great chases and a badass scene where the Terminator takes on the machines as they start to rise. I don't really love his fight with the TX, to be honest, because it's got a lot of obvious CGI. As a live action, almost Mortal Kombat fight, I guess it's pretty amusing. Ultimately, I think the negatives of T3 still tend to rear their ugly head a bit too much and just prevent me from fully loving the film. One of the main issues is there's a real lack of atmosphere. While Mustow can shoot an action scene, he can't create the mood that James Cameron did. The film is too light, too much of it takes place at daytime. In fact, all of it takes place at daytime. And you just end up missing that blue metallic tone and menace of T2, or the striking 80s vibes of the first Terminator. Now I'm not saying I wanted the same look, it's just that they made no effort to create one. It looks like every other movie. It's so cookie cutter, and the Terminator franchise should never feel like that. You've got to make it stand out in some way. The film also struggles to be memorable. Despite my reassessment and pointing out the things I like, other than the ending, not a lot of this film really is ingrained in my mind. That's an issue. A Terminator film should stand the test of time, and just being decent but not memorable is a bit of a shame. The film is also criminally underwritten. A lot of the stuff I praised in this video, like the discussions of fate and inevitability, are great ideas, and they could have gone so much further with it. You could have matched the thought-provoking themes of T2 with these ideas, they were that good. It's almost as if they just chose to halt the brakes on these ideas to make more room for the action, conveniently forgetting that the Terminator movies weren't actually about the action. It really was the ideas, just the action was so good at the same time. The performances also aren't fantastic, they're just good or decent, and the whole thing ends up feeling a little too ordinary for a Terminator film. You're just waiting for it to get off the ground, you want the excitement, you want that electricity, and it never fully gets there. And like I said earlier, the less said about the comedy the better. There are some genuinely funny moments, but the fact people still cringe when they think about the comedy just shows you this film went way off road with the humour. So is Terminator 3 a letdown or underrated? My answer is, honestly, probably both. And if you enjoyed this video, click on another one on the screen now. I do these kinds of retrospective and analysis videos on classic films all the time. Thanks for watching, and have a good day.